At the end of this lecture, we'd have had added an input key binding for entering or exiting a vehicle, and that key would be E. As discussed in the previous video, we will have to keep the E key pressed for a specific amount of seconds in order to either enter or exit a vehicle. And we would have implemented the logic for for the long key press, and finally we would have tested the input code for entering vehicle. We'll be using debug strings for that. Let's get started. Alright, so back into the editor, let's go over to project settings and go to the input section. And if you look at the action mappings, it's already added a bunch of things. That's coming in from the third person template. So inside the action mappings, let's add a new binding and we'll call this enter vehicle. Okay, and this is going to be the E key, E as in echo, and scroll down and select the E key out here. Alright, that's it. So let's come back to I think I'm gonna bring this player controller out here. Let's first create a bunch of variables. I'm gonna put these in their own categories, so I'm gonna call this references, and I'll dump this variable inside the references as well. Right, now let's create a boolean variable and we'll call this entering vehicle. Right, and let's put this inside flags. I'm not sure if we can make this private. I think we'll keep this public for now. So inside, let's create a new graph and we'll call this game input. And all the input code is going to be written inside the player controller. So the way this is going to work is it will simply send out messages to the birds or the pawns in question. If all the input, every single input is going to be handled by the player controller, and only the function for what to do when input happens is going to be written inside the specific pawns blueprint class. So for instance, if you're trying to move the Seahawk, then the input is going to be sent in from the A player controller. Now the player controller does not really know what to do when you are hitting the W key when the Seahawk has been activated, when the jet has been activated. So it's just going to find the Seahawk and it's going to tell the Seahawk that the W key has been activated, the W key has been pressed. You know what to do with it. I'm just letting you know. And the custom event or the function that we'll write inside the Seahawk is going to implement the movement code. Okay, so that's the architecture that we'll be maintaining throughout, and that's the architecture that pretty much everyone maintains. So first is we will be bringing in an event, the event to enter vehicle. So we'll say enter vehicle action event. There you go. And we're going to use this as a dummy variable for now, and we're going to check whether this is true. Or no, we're not going to check this first. We're going to first set this to true. Right, entering vehicle is true. If it's pressed, entering vehicle is true, and if it's not pressed, or if it's released, not when if it's released, then we turn this to false. All right, now we add a delay node, and the delay node can be 0 seconds. That's okay, just need a node there, some node, and then we check whether the entering vehicle is still on. Okay, when if it's still true. If it's false, which means that the player has released it. If it's still true, okay, then simply let's add a temp variable. I'm gonna create a new reference called category called temp variables or test variables. Okay, and this is going to be, let's say, test time. Okay, and let's make this into a float variable. And now if it's still pressed, then we're gonna bring the test time and we'll simply add this with a value which would be our trusty get world delta seconds, right? And then we simply set this test time with that amount, right? And then we print this to the screen, Okay, and once it's done, we come back and connect to the delay node here. Let's add a reroute node quickly, and there you go. All right, let's see what happens here. Okay, if I hit play, I'll just hit E, and it keeps on increasing, right? And if I let go off, then it's gonna stop there. Now I'm gonna make this 0 so that just one value gets printed. Okay, and out here we'll just print another string, and we'll call this key released, key released, and make this red, and that's orange. 1 0 and 0. All right, hit play. Let's hit E and let go of that, and it says key released. All right, that's perfect. So let's go through this simple straightforward code one more time. So every time E key is pressed, we are either turning a flag on, we are turning the flag on when the E key is pressed, and we are turning this off when the E key is released, right? And then we are adding a simple delay node which has no duration in it, which has 0 duration in it, because we want this to run every single frame without any delay. And we are adding a delay node here and not adding this directly to the branch node is because this would create an infinite loop and it would just crash your editor. So then we are checking, once a delay node is added, we are checking whether the entering vehicle is still on. Okay, if it's on, then we are simply adding the test time to the get world delta seconds for testing purposes only, and then we are setting the test time with the new value, and then we are simply printing that to the string, and then we are coming back to the delay node and we are checking again whether it's on, because had the player released the E key, then this would have turned false, but this would be yielding the result as false, right? So in that case, this thing won't be run, and that's why we were able to see the message. I deleted that message. We're able to see that message out here, and the message was E key released. Okay, so that's why we're able to see that message. Otherwise, it would keep going and it would update the time every single time. Now, this time is going to be a variable inside player controller or any other place, which is going to decide the amount of time that's needed to enter a vehicle, right? So if it's a Seahawk, let's say it takes about 10 seconds to enter a Seahawk, which is pretty long. Just for an example, if it takes 10 seconds to enter a Seahawk, it might take just 3 seconds to enter a normal armored vehicle, okay, with just a simple door and just a four-wheeled ground vehicle. So that's what this is going to be used for. Now let's get rid of all of these things. We don't need to print anything yet. We don't need to print anything anymore. So we can get rid of this, and in here we can add a custom event or a function. So let's say the player is trying to enter the Seahawk and not any other vehicle. So we'll have to set a variable from here, because this is where we are figuring out that the Seahawk, the player is trying to enter the Seahawk, right? So we'll need a variable inside player controller. We'll call this variable uh, time required to enter, right? And let's compile, save. This is going to be a float. Compile, and let's make this say 0. We'll just keep the 0 because this will be dynamically set from the different blueprints, from the different pawn blueprints. Alright, and let's make this into a public variable, so we'll have the first letter uppercase. Now let's go back to Seahawk, and let's say once we are showing this message, let's also create a variable, and let's call this this will also be called time required to enter. Alright, and this will be a private variable. Let's turn this into a float, and let's say the Seahawk takes about 5 seconds. Okay, and let's bring in the player controller ref, right, and let's set the time required to enter. with the time required to enter by the Seahawk, which is 5 seconds here. Right? If that's the case, if it's entered the trigger, then we setting the time required to enter as this. Otherwise, we set the time required to enter as 0. Alright, quite straightforward. Compile, save. Let's come back to AA Player Controller. Now inside here, let's create a new function, or let's create a custom event. Right? I'm going to create a new graph and I'm going to call this custom events. So all the custom events are going to be living in here. So the first custom event is going to be called start entering vehicle. Right? Now let's call this function right away and put this here like that, and let's connect these two nodes. There you go. Alright, so far it does nothing, and when it's false, then we bring the entering vehicle, and set that to false. Right, now of course this is not going to be getting in right away, because we just need to call this enter vehicle function. The E key only needs to be functional when it's inside a trigger, right? So this is going to happen again by using another flag, and this will be called player can player enter. This will be a boolean, or byte boolean. Let's put this inside its own category of flags, and let's also put this inside its own category, and let's call this uh, timer time variables, I guess. Okay, and can player enter will be set from the Seahawk or its different the different vehicles that will allow the player to enter and exit. So once it shows this message, let's bring in the reference to our player controller ref again, and let's set this can player enter to true. Very straightforward. If not, then reset the can player enter to false, so that the E key cannot be pressed from anywhere. Right, there you go. And I think this needs to come in a bit. Move these guys back as well. Right, compile and save. Let's come back here and let's sever the wires here, and we'll just say can player enter, say if only if this is false will this ever happen. Alright, no, I mean only if it's true can this ever happen. Right, there you go. And if it's false, nothing is gonna happen. And when when the key is released, then we just connect that to this. Right, and add a readout node there, and get rid of this print string. We need another variable, and we gonna call this time spent entering. Okay, and this will be a float again. This need not be called from outside, so we'll make this private, and let's put this inside time variables. Right, so all we're gonna do is say time spent entering to 0, because this is going to keep a track of how long the user has kept the E key pressed. Okay, so also out here, this need not be false here, because we already testing against the entering vehicle. If it's false, then this need not be false again. So this is again going to have the same reset of this variable. Right, if this is entering vehicle is false, then we reset the time spent entering to 0. We do nothing else. Right, and with this in place, I think we can push this back a bit. Let's go over to our start entering vehicle, And let's write some simple, very simple code here. So now we need one more flag, and we're going to call this has entered vehicle, and this is going to be a boolean again. Let's put this inside the flags category. Let's first test this out. Put the condition, and we'll say only if it is not entered the vehicle should we run the code, right? So now we need to record the amount of time the user is keeping the E key pressed. Now we know that we are only entering this custom event when player is keeping the E key pressed. So to record that, we're going to say time spent entering. We're going to record that inside this variable, and this will be added with the get world delta seconds, right? And then it'll be we'll set the time spent entering to this amount. There you go. And then we check whether this is greater than or equal to the time that needs to be spent in order to enter the vehicle. All right, if it's not true, if it's first we'll handle true. If it's true, which means that the player has entered the vehicle, so we can bring this variable in and we can set this, and we can say yes, the player has entered the vehicle. All right, and then we say time spent entering to 0, and then for now we'll just put in a simple print string, and we'll say player has entered the vehicle. But let's put this in green. 0, no, this is going to be 1 and 0. There you go. And let's make this duration 0, right? And if it's not true, which means that there's still time before he enters the vehicle, then we simply print the time required to enter onto the screen for now. Otherwise, this is where the code for incrementing the progress bar is going to happen. And this will be time spent entering. And let's connect that to this. And let's also make this 0. And let's have a red color. Right? And I'm gonna drag and drop all of these presets. So this will be 0, and this will be 1, and this will be green, and then this will be blue. We got RGB, and I think yellow is 0.5 and 0.5, 0.5 and 0.5. What color is this? No, 0. No, this is 1 and 1 is yellow. I'm bad with colors. And then we can have white, right? Just putting everything in the palette, and a black. So we got all the colors covered. Great. Now let's make this red. There you go. Now in case there's still time for the player to enter, then this is what is going to be printed out. Else we gonna say the player has entered the vehicle, we're gonna reset the time spent entering variable, and we'll simply print something on the string on the screen saying that the player has entered the vehicle, right? So when you hit play, if you hit the E key, nothing is gonna happen because we're not inside the trigger. And then let's go inside here. It says press E to enter the vehicle. Now if I hit the E key, alright, so something went wrong. Let's see why. Can player enter? If you go to Seahawk, oh, that's because this has to be true. There you go. Now this should work. Let's go over to the Seahawk. Let's go in and let's hit the E key. The time required to enter is 5. So we are setting the time required to enter inside the player controller, and then we're checking whether can the player enter. It's true. I think the reason is, if you go back inside the start entering vehicle, I had figured that out. This has to be false. If the player has not entered the vehicle yet, this is what we have to do. Okay, and now compile, save. Let's test it for the last time. This should work. Fingers crossed. Get in. There you go. So we're gonna wait for 5 seconds before we get that message. Okay, I think we did not get that message because uh, let's say, let's make this 10 seconds. Okay, let's try this one more time. 4 seconds. There you go. The player has entered the vehicle. So that is the first step towards accomplishing this logic. In next video, we're gonna add the progress bar, and we gonna tweak this code in bits and pieces to make sure that it is reusable. Now it works seamlessly, and that's it. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.